Welcome and good morning. This is another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. It is Monday, May the 10th, and we are trying to get the week started well with a good conversation. Today, my guest is Emory Edwards from EdChoice, which is a national education nonprofit that, if you can't tell by the name, is pushing for educational options across the board for all families to be able to decide who, when, where, and what their children will learn. Emory, good morning, brother. Welcome.
Good morning, sir.
Listen, this is what I want to talk about today. You and I have been watching the Twitters, and there's quite a bit of I don't know how to put it, but we're in a different spot now in education reform, where we are starting to see demands for us to go further in the types of education we can have, and demands that they be more racially equitable. And those two things aren't always working together for us. Those aren't. My grandmother used to say something that I will keep repeating my entire life. Show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are. She used to mean by that, if you tell me who your friends are, I will look at how they move, how they do their life, how they talk, what they think, what they believe, and it'll reflect on you because you're their friends. Well, some of our friends in ed world, especially in education choice world, don't always get it right, in my mind, when it comes to things like racial equity, race and racism, systemic racism, understanding our experience. So at times, to me, it feels like we need to have a movement that's for us, by us, where we get to define what the rules of engagement are.
Yeah.
Well, what about you, brother? What do you think?
No, I totally agree with that. I think a lot of times, especially when you look at the history of our movement, it started out as people kind of coming into our neighborhood saying, hey, we want to do something great for you. Here's what we think it is. Here's how we think it should look, without really sitting down and kind of asking our community, hey, what do you want? How can we assist you to get to this place? So it's like now we're kind of working backwards to say, all right, we have these policies in place. Now let's kind of teach our community how we can utilize this to do exactly like you said, build something that's for us, by us.
Yeah, in Indy, you all have a very saturated market. I wouldn't call it saturated, but you guys have a lot of school choice. You have lots of activity around providing different types of schooling and options. So it's not a choice hostile environment. So once you get across that bridge where you say, oh, we're fighting for education and school choice and expanded options and blah, blah, you still have racial issues that you have to tend to, right?
Yeah. And here's what's unique about Indy. Everybody looks at us and say, hey, you have a lot of options, but they're scattered. So when you look at it from a charter standpoint, your charters are really kind of clustered in one main area, one school district, and other districts haven't been open to it, or other options just haven't manufactured themselves there. When you look at the private school choice side of it, yes, we have one of the most robust programs. We actually just, passed an expansion that the governor signed a couple of weeks ago. But when you look at leaders of color in the private school space, your options are very slim. So, like personally, as a family, I think we will just barely would qualify for a choice scholarship. But honestly, there's not really a private school that I would feel comfortable sending my kids to, especially since I have younger kids. My kids were in high school. There are a couple high schools that I would be open to sending them to, because I've already had the opportunity to kind of build that, base of who they are, how, people should respect you, things that you need to know. So I'm okay with you being in this environment where, you may be 1 out of 10 or, 1 out of 15 on a high school level. But, from a kindergarten, first grader, second grader, we tried it. Probably won't ever do it again.
Not a good experience. This is what I think is funny. I think it's funny that people think that when we fight for school choice, that we think that it's the end of the road. And in some cases, it's only the beginning.
Yeah.
Like being able to choose what you want at a restaurant, for instance, from the menu is only the beginning. It's not the actual, like, you might look at the menu and go like, yeah, but everything on this menu is crap. I need a different restaurant. I look at you, Denisha Merriweather and Shaka Mitchell and Walter Banks Jr., a generation, I have a generation within ed reform. We have some elders like Howard Fuller and others. You're kind of in the middle, going, that other direction. Then you get Denisha and Walter Blanks and these other folks who are brand new, not brand new, but they're coming up in the ranks as new voices in EdChoice. We all at one point or another are going to come to the realization that we agree with a lot of our employers or the people that we work with, or our friends and allies. And at the same time, there's a need for us to be talking about what a uniquely Black choice movement might look like, or just education movement, period. Have you been bumping into any of that I don't know what you would call it, mess, or
I would say from my personal standpoint, I'm blessed that, EdChoice, the group that I work for, they understand kind of that lens that I have to see life through. So there are a lot of things that we agree on, and there are some nuances that they kind of give me, the freedom, the liberty to say, I need to be able to talk about this in a different way that I can get more of my community to truly understand and truly rally and come behind. And the fact that now we're seeing results from those conversations makes things a little bit easier for me on that front. But when you look at the movement on a whole, there are some of our allies that need to understand there are things that they do and say that really make this work for Black and brown people a lot harder. We're out here trying to open doors, and one tweet, one bad quote can literally slam a door that we've been working to open for years, slam that door right in our face. And one thing that I like I said, about EdChoice, like, we've been able to have those challenging conversations to where we're looking internally to say, hey, maybe there's some things that we need to change in the way we do our work, so versus going in a state and saying, hey, let's get everybody at one table, being able to sit down and realize that, hey, one of these groups that's at the table has, been racist for years. There have been a lot of things that they've done, and you're not going to get minority groups to come in this room and be like, I'm supposed to believe them. No, I'm good on that. So looking at how do we still support the movement in different states, but realizing, one coalition doesn't always work. How do we actually still kind of have these conversations in different silos, different pockets with different groups, and at this point still try to bring everybody somewhat together in this message, but realizing you're not always going to have everybody in the same room.
Yeah, I feel like the only way that we're going to win in education advocacy, period, is if we try to do our very best to have the biggest tent that we can have.
Yeah.
And we can bring the most people together, regardless of how different they are. But because that has been my philosophy for so long, I have also, like, more recently started seeing, but there are places where you draw a line in the sand.
Yeah. Like, I look at that comparison, that big tent comparison, to where I'm more, hey, let's bring everybody to the same campsite. And that way, hey, if they're
different tents, is that what you're about to say?
Yeah. Come to the big tent, but hey, if we need to do a couple smaller tents, at least we're all in the same campsite.
Yeah.
That way we still got to get some of the work done, keep the work moving, because
I love that
we don't want in the tent together.
You just solved my problem. I love that. If I could just tell some people, that's a different tent, brother. You got to go to a different tent. We made a tent just for the racists. Y'all can go over to that tent over there. Y'all can have a little meeting. And Sherry Lucas Hall puts choose your tent.
Yes.
Yeah, choose your adventure. That would be very helpful right now, because this is what happens to me sometimes. I will have somebody. Let me just stop for a second. EdChoice, good organization. Corey DeAngelis, one of my school choice people who I can watch his research and say, okay, this is a dude who's fighting. Just specifically on school choice like nobody's business. I look at Mike Machine, who's with you guys at your organization, just putting out kind of nerdy research about the truth. Just like, let's just be truthful about choice. That's cool. It's when you start delving into other things, like you start getting that MAGA stain on you of stuff like, anti-CRT and, anti-racism is just racism in reverse and whatnot. Now you done opened up a whole nother conversation where it's going to be hard for me not to get DMs from people. My DM, what is your boy out here saying? Why is your dude saying this stuff? I thought this was your dude. Now we have a problem, right? Because now I have to be co-signing you, which I'm not going to do. No. It's not going to happen. So now you're putting me in a bad situation when that happens, and it's happening too much.
Yeah. And, with kind of this, there are some that work with us that once they kind of go off that ledge, to call it, we can sit down and have a conversation with them. They're intellectuals and try to explain things that help them see, here's how your view of this kind of can affect us in a bad way. But then there are those that are just, they're just gone. So that's why we have to have those separate tents. Because there are a lot of people coming out of this pandemic that once we start seeing each other at conferences and stuff anymore, it's going to be very hard for me to look them in the face, shake their hand, and respect them just because some of the words, some of the things that they've said over the past year, that, hey, if that's what you truly believe in, we can work together on the school choice movement. But yeah, I can't roll with you like that.
I mean, really, what's going on in your mind when you see that? When you see someone who's been in your world and you've been generally cool with, but they go out there, you look at the tweets and they're going that totally other direction, that Fox News, Black people are taking over. They're trying to ruin our country, that Tucker Carlson. What do you do? Like, what's going through your mind when you think this is somebody I have to work with?
For some of those that are kind of already out there, I probably have they're already kind of suspect to me. So
it wasn't surprising to you.
Yeah, for some of them it's not a shock, but then there are those that I'm like, I don't mind reaching out one-on-one. Like, hey, are you open to having a conversation about this? Because that lets me know truly where you are. Mm-hmm. If you're open to sit down and say, hey, let's have a dialogue. Let me help you understand why people view things this way. And you're willing to sit down and at least we can have a cordial, respectful conversation about it, I can deal with that. But if you can't even reach out to me or you go around me and all of those things that we know happen, I'm looking at you with the side eye for a while.
Yeah, I should just call that out and be specific about that too. For people who aren't in the movement or don't know much about how the back rooms work, if I say something or somebody else, in my network says something on Twitter that certain white folks don't like, they call your funders and they call who they presume to be your boss, and they try and get you kneecapped. I'm in a little bit different situation because I'm the CEO of my organization, but it wouldn't be out of, previously when I wasn't the CEO of an organization, it wasn't out of the question that my so-called boss would get a call from somebody saying, you got to muzzle that Chris Stewart, or that Chris Stewart said something I don't like, or I don't understand it or whatnot. I think people know me now well enough to know that that's never going to work.
Yeah. But a lot of times those that do that, they don't do a lot of research. So they don't really know how you operate. They don't know your background. One thing that I've had the pleasure to be able to do this anytime that I think, like I said, I'm usually pretty good about reading people. So if I've said something that I think is going to come back before they even have had a chance to go all the way around, I've looped in Low End. I've looped Carrie Hunter in and say, hey, just so you know, had this conversation. It's probably going to come back to you. If we want to talk about it, let's talk about it.
You tell them ahead of time.
And I got that from retail.
Yeah. Wow.
One of the funniest things that we used to always go back and forth with, you'll have I spent 8 years in retail. You have a customer that will come in with product that they've worn. And clearly you're in the store like, damn, I can tell you walked 10 miles in these shoes. I'm not taking them back. They'll call customer service who can't see the product. Customer service does what they're supposed to do. Hey, we're going to make the customer happy. While that customer's in the store going off of me, I'm sitting there emailing my DM, hey, here's what's happening, here's what's going on. Because that's covered. And that's showing like, hey, I'm always going to be honest about the situation, what I did, what I said. I know at some point we're going to have to resolve this. So, but I just want to make sure that you have the full story. And there have been issues where I've sent stuff to them and it was like, they've laughed at it. It won't be an issue. And, a couple of days later, they get that email and it was like, well, you told us. Just, I knew it was going to happen. But,
Well, that's good of you to do that. I've never done that really. And I was in retail for a while, but, I can't remember what I used to do back then. But now I feel like if I'm standing in my truth and I'm telling my truth, I'm going to have a problem with you. If you're supposed to be my so-called boss, I'm going to have a problem. If you have a problem with me living in my truth, because it's going to mean maybe this isn't the job for me. If you can't handle your people, and first of all, tell them don't call you. Like, I'm a grown ass man. Call me, right? You can't be out here saying that you're fighting for better education for children of color and, for everybody, low income families to have options and choices in education and whatnot. If when you have a problem with a person of color, the first thing you think to do is act like it's 1852 and call their so-called boss,
I think that's something that's just comes from my background. Because even outside of work, if you have a friend or you hear somebody that's on Facebook or something talking about you, first thing we usually say is like, hey, don't go run your mouth to the street. You got a problem, come to me with it. And that's just something our community is like, we're quick to say.
Right.
I don't know if other communities are always that comfortable. So I'm the same way. Like,
no, they have a Karen syndrome. I'm just going to be real about this. We didn't have a name for it before. Like before the whole Karen movement, we didn't understand the let me talk to your manager thing as part of like, it's embedded in the way that they do business. Oh, let me talk to your boss. I don't have to listen to what you're saying or what you do or whatnot. I'll go above you, above your head. And when it comes to what I got to say, there is no above me.
Yeah.
Like, you either going to deal with me or we're not going to deal, but I don't have a boss. Right. Like slavery was outlawed in 1865. I don't have a boss. So if you don't like what I have to say, which brings me to like the movement, this is what I don't see. I feel like I see a lot of the conversation in ed world starting to push rightward towards a lot of things around kind of like, let's be more restrictive on social justice stuff. Let's not talk about that because you're alienating good white folks and all of that stuff. What I don't see is from our side what our response to that is. Maybe it's because theirs is out of the gate already. They're starting to pass laws in states that say you can't teach critical race theory, right? And by critical race theory, I'm not talking about some big fancy theory. Let's call it what it actually is. They're saying that you can't teach the truthful history of the United States when it comes to race and racism. Is what they're really saying. So they're basically saying you have to teach white supremacy or black ignorance. Those are your two choices that they want to leave left. What's our response to that?
I mean, for me is, when you look at it, we should be able to teach culturally affirming curriculum to our kids. Our kids should be able to go to a school and actually see themselves in a great light. And by teaching the true history actually helps people understand how do we not make this history again. Perfect example was the Texas legislator that was writing one of the, I won't say voter suppression, but voter laws in Texas, and was saying, hey, I went back and read the notes.
You better call that what that is, brother. You better call that voter suppression.
But, saying that he went back and did research and was reading notes from like the 1875 Charter Convention, and, the other legislator called him out on it. If you are not actually taught what happened in history, you'll end up repeating it and not knowing. And, this guy may have been an actually good guy. I don't know him. I don't really know that much about his history, but you could tell he was excited. I read all this stuff and I looked into it, and he didn't understand. Like, when you go back to most of the conventions that created state charters, state constitutions, it was all white men in the room. It was, especially in the South, it was probably majority slave owners in the room. So if you're going back to celebrate something from the perspective that they wrote it in, you're not looking at where we are today. You're not realizing that they didn't write that stuff to actually empower women. because women couldn't be landowners. They definitely didn't write this stuff to empower minorities. So if nobody is teaching you true history and you're actually not learning from that history, good, bad, and different, you're going to repeat it. And like I've seen a lot of, I'm not shocked that we've had a lot of white parents, especially white mothers, stand up and say, I'm not comfortable with my kid learning this because I don't want my kid to feel like they're a bad white person. And a lot of it is, I think, there are conversations that they don't want to have with their kids, not realizing that every day, as a father of 2 Black boys, luckily, my oldest will be 7 this year. He's already at a point where I have to start having conversations. Here's how people are going to look at you. Here are things that you have to be concerned about. We had a parent teacher conference, and his teacher was reminding us, was like, how Emory likes to voice his opinion. So as I'm preparing him for 2nd grade, I'm working with him on how to say things in a different way, how to say things with, the right tone. And this is a 6-year-old that, luckily he has an older Black teacher that's been with him for a year and a half, because he actually in kindergarten was taking reading from her. But she even knows what we have to go through to where she's like, hey, just in case you run into a teacher that misplaces your curiosity and you questioning things, your own critical thinking as you being insubordinate, here's how you probably need to work on your tone and your inflection so you can deal with that. And we're having to teach that to a 6-year-old, but you're scared to have an honest conversation about, history, where some of your people actually came from, some of the things they actually did with your kids. And most of them are in high school. We're not talking about, teaching world history and U.S. history to that level to 1st, 2nd, 3rd graders. You don't really get to true American history until you're middle school going into high school. So you can't have this conversation with your kid who's old enough to actually be able to understand it and have this dialogue back and forth. But you don't want to adjust stuff so my kids can actually understand where they came from and understand their history.
I mean, bias, as we know it, starts very early.
Yeah.
So, they say that babies start to being biased early. Like they start, they take in a lot of messages more than we think earlier than we would think. And they start exhibiting behavior that comes from them taking in those messages early. So if you have a Black child in daycare, between the authority figures and the students, they're all taking in messages and exchanging messages with your kid. So my job, who's raising kids of color versus a white parent's job who are raising white kids, might be different. Like we might be looking out for different things. And it's, so I'm looking at the idea that everything, all the messages and all of the resources and everything within the other person's family is aimed at making them first world people, the people that run everything, the managers, the owners, the directors, the producers, the people who get to say what goes where. I think all that starts from baby on. I think the exact opposite of that is what the messages and resources say to our children as they're younger, which means to me, we might have 2 different movements. So it's amazing that we agree on something like school choice, like so that we can have a common movement and a common intent around that. But I think on our side of the fence, we have to start defining a little bit more and a little bit better what it means to truly listen to our parents.
Yeah.
And tell the stories and the things that they're facing and thinking about that are not the same as everybody else.
And I think that's exactly why, like, when we talk about this, like really creating a movement to empower our communities, we have to do a better job of connecting with our Black legislators, because when these bills are being presented, there's no one to stand there to really fight against them. I give our legislators a lot of credit. There are some things that they're loud about, that they support us, that they ride for us. But when it comes to education, most of them don't even want to sit down and have a conversation to understand what choice can really allow us to do. So when some of these bills are presented, they don't want to be in the room. They don't want to have a conversation around it. They don't want to look at how we can truly benefit from it. And when they start making changes like this, they don't understand how those changes truly affect us. If we had legislators that were more inclined to say, you know what, hey, if you want to pass this anti-racism, anti-CRT bill for our traditional public schools, that's cool. But let me put this in here. Here's a caveat to where, as we start passing private school choice programs, I want to make it easier for Black school leaders to actually launch their own private schools. So that way, I don't have to worry about this curriculum issue that you just passed. Because we still have a mechanism to teach our kids what we want them to learn and actually truly build a culturally, community reaffirming curriculum that our kids actually need to have versus what you're force feeding our kids that we know is not working.
I think that's a great point, just because, well, let me actually, take what you just said and say that expands the conversation a little bit too, because when we think about a movement for us, by us, and we're talking about this right now in terms of the people on the right who don't always get the racial stuff. There are people on the left who don't always get the educational freedom stuff either.
Right.
So it's not like we have, there isn't one nemesis. And so anybody listening or watching this, I hope that wasn't what was coming through in the message. We have a particular problem right now because there are people on the right who are trying to pass laws that will make it harder for us to teach our kids the real history and the real kind of actuality of today to our students. And that's a problem. At the same time, though, Emory, is what you were just saying is, we'll be in a room with other legislators on the left or Democrats who are totally on board with all the racial stuff, the social justice, police reform, economic fairness, all these other things that really make sense for Black people and our Black families. And then when you get around to school choice, they're like, nah, bro, can't do that with you. Matter of fact, I can't even publicly talk with you about that. So bring me a crime bill, bring me like a criminal justice reform bill, and we'll have the ribbon cutting. Start trying to give Black families the freedom to escape these broken down, jacked up ass schools. And now you're gonna have to deal with the fact that too much of my money comes from the people who work in them schools.
Right. And I think what I've learned is sometimes we just have to change that conversation. So, and you've been a part of some of the conversations that I had. When you look at it from truly an economic empowerment standpoint, and you start pointing out the economy that comes behind, education system and the amount of dollars that flow out of our systems to, different private groups. There are some Black legislators that truly understand capitalism, truly understand, how to build our economy, how to try to rebuild our communities. And when they see it from that economic development standpoint of saying, hey, if you have a charter network or you have a Black private school in your district, and that actual school can determine who they want to hire for their catering, for their food service, for their janitorial service. If they want to be intentional saying, hey, we're going to specifically hire people from within the community, those dollars stay within the community versus we know of these mega districts, when you look at their budgets, these $1 billion budgets, it's typically not us that are getting those contracts.
Mm-hmm.
We may get 15 to 20% of the contract, depending on where we are, because, there are some cities that have been, really forward and saying, hey, you need to have some type of minority involvement to get our city contracts, but we're still not getting the bulk of those dollars. Those dollars are not coming back to our community. So
even in schools where the bulk of the students are Black,
even in schools where the bulk of the students are Blacks, when half of the school board is Black and the superintendent is Black, those dollars are still not coming back to us. And we're the ones that, are championing the work, but it's, somebody else that's, dad had the contract and passed that contract along to his son, who's probably going to pass that along to his son and his friend. So
we don't get the building choice actually builds a market that builds ownership, community ownership over the means of production, the means of education.
Yep.
So things like integration and which in some ways for us was disintegration, like integration that other people were pitching and they're still pitching today, as a matter of fact, is actually disintegration for us because it meant our schools disintegrated So our ability to have Black janitors and to say who gets the food contract and how the school's going to run and what pedagogy gets accepted or whatnot was lost. So we lose that. Raymond Ankrum here says, let's sit here for a second. Emory Edwards, are we saying separate but equal?
I'm not saying separate but equal, but I do think that we put too much trust in Brown versus Board. Brown versus Board actually did a lot to help our community, but it did a lot of harm as well. And by harm, I mean, when you go back to pre-Brown versus Board, there was this network of great Black-led schools. Booker T. Washington, Freedom Schools, Rosenwald Schools. When you look at really how a lot of our HBCUs started, they were normal schools, which were high schools before they actually started doing college material. Brown v. Board killed all of that. You know, a lot of our Black teachers were fired. They weren't hired over. A lot of our Black principals, administrators were fired. And because of that, history was lost. A lot of our people today don't even understand that. I did a conference of HBCU student leaders, and we had this same conversation just looking at the Rosenwald schools and was like, you know, hey, you're at this particular HBCU. I guarantee if you go right outside of your campus or even maybe on your campus was a Rosenwald school. And I had one kid come back to me and was like, you know, I was walking around my campus and I noticed that there was this kind of older, like one door house. And I started looking into it. And I didn't realize that was like the original school that our campus actually started from. And it was a freedom school that Booker T. Washington helped run. And I was like, that's exactly what we're talking about. And he was like, why don't we know this? Why don't they teach us that? And I think if more people knew this, had this understanding, this whole notion of us being able to run schools and own schools would be a lot easier for people to conceptualize.
And it really feels like that is the movement, isn't it? That really is, in a way, go back to history, find the places where you were strong and where you own something, and try and make that the movement. We should be running more schools. We should be determining the budgets and the curriculum for our students.
I mean, just like how we have HBCUs for college, we should have the same type of system, same type of schools from a K-12 level. If we can't get our kids through K-12 to our HBCUs, what are we doing this for?
Right.
I hear every year you always hear about campaigns saying, hey, let's try to get more kids to historically Black colleges and universities. How can we support them more? To me, the number way of supporting them more is making sure that we have quality K through 12 programs that can ensure that they get there. And if we can build direct pipelines, so you're a Morehouse graduate or a Spelman graduate, y'all get together, you launch a school that now has a direct relationship to Morehouse and Spelman. Build those type of partnerships to where kids at an early age are understanding and seeing that, hey, here's what Black excellence is. Here's how it works. Here's how it exists. We're not saying, you know, hey, pull your kids to where they're never around white people. But also we understand that we do need to have our kids in a place that's culturally affirming, that actually shows them and will push them to their true potential. Because we don't always get that in places where we're the minority.
What do you think has to happen in our networks of people to get the conversation started about we need to build something off the grid a little bit? Like if we are talking about a movement, those movements, all movements to me start with a conversation. Yeah. And all conversations start with trusted groups of people. You know, all good conversations, like revolutionary conversations, start with trust. People who can trust each other, sit down, have conversations. I know I have my visions. I've written about this. You've seen I've written about it a little bit of what I think needs to happen. Yeah. Are you seeing kind of the possibilities for something?
I think we're a lot closer. And what's funny, I remember when you first wrote it, I actually sent you a note. It's like, whoa, when did this meeting happen? Because like I've been saying the same thing. We need to get all these people together. And then I caught the end of it. It was like, oh, you're having the same dream that I'm having. But I think we're getting closer. There's some conversations that I've had where there are some groups that are more willing to come to the table now. I think definitely since Trump is out of office, things will be a little bit easier for us to have that conversation. But also, I think what's going to be the big driver of it is millennials, my generation, the generation that's a little bit younger. They are willing to sit down and say, hey, this system isn't right. And we need to figure out what we can do for our kids and for the future. So if that means we need to sit down and kind of figure out how to bring these things together and just truly look at it from looking at all possibilities of what could be created, they're willing to sit down at the table and say, hey, let's figure this out. One of the things that you've heard about this that I've been trying to do, and hopefully we'll be able to pull it off, is let's create a national agenda around education for Black and brown kids that looks at everything. You know, here are the changes, here are advances that we need to do in traditional schools. Here's how we truly need to support charter schools. Here's how we need to create a space, you know, for the growth of Black-led private schools. You know, here's how post-secondary, you know, Pell Grants, supporting colleges, supporting PWIs that actually do a great job with Black and brown students. I'm a graduate of Georgia State. When I look at Georgia State, it's one of the most diverse, to me, diverse universities in the country. To date, it actually graduates more Black students than any other university in the country, and it's actually held that title, I think, 6 or 7 years running. So, and there's some intentionality there about how they actually support Black and brown students when they get on campus to make sure that they actually make it all the way through to graduate. So I think there's an opportunity for us to have this broader conversation to figure out how this agenda looks versus what's happened in the past. You have, here's an agenda that's strictly for traditional public schools. Then you have the charter school movement that they kind of help us out somewhat on the private school side, but they kind of want to make sure that they stay in their lane as well. Then you have the private school work that's like, hey, let's have more options. Let's have, you know, whether it's a tax credit, let's vouchers, but let's make it where everybody can have access to what they're doing. And there's not one solid cohesive that looks at all the options that Black parents, and I forgot homeschooling, that looks at all the options that Black parents want to utilize to educate their kids, and how can we actually come together to say, here's what we want, here's what we need, and you take your Divine Nine, you take your Urban League, your 100 Black Men, your NCNW, all of those groups now can collectively say, hey, we understand this, we see this, now we're going to go to Congressional Black Caucus. We're going to go to the National Black Caucus, the state legislators, and say, how are you crafting bills around education to actually connect with this agenda?
You said so much there that I think is actually like the movement. Like one very important thing is your organization tracks all these things like hybrid schooling, homeschooling, even private schooling, whatever. And over this last year, you guys have been doing polls, and the polling on all of those things to me just shows an open opportunity like never ever before. People are being able to even conceive of it might be possible. Right. I don't know how good a job we're doing with our community about harnessing all of that work that they're doing or that thinking. Like parents really are making some different decisions right now, not because they necessarily want to, in a lot of cases, because they have to. And are we saying, okay, this should be a conversation, folks? Like this is actually happening.
I think now we have more data. Like we actually just launched a Black Parents Poll where we're looking at on a monthly basis how Black parents are feeling about different things that are happening within education. Another group that we work with, Curious Ed, they've launched a national community awareness survey that's kind of asking some of those same questions. And they're actually planning on doing a national tour to go with certain communities to say, hey, let's talk about what you guys are looking at, what you guys are seeing, your wants and needs, and now let us kind of help train you where you can kind of continue this conversation and be able to go, you know, to your community and say, and to your leaders to say, hey, I really want to understand what a micropod is. You know, I've homeschooled my kid through remote learning for the past 18 months. I really don't want to send them back in the building 5 days a week. how can we look at creating something that's truly a hybrid? Because what we're seeing from some of our early polls, more parents actually want that. There are a lot of Black parents that are actually interested in learning, like, hey, I might be interested in this hybrid piece. I might be interested in doing a micropod. I work a job to where I'm home 2 days a week. So, and I have a couple friends that are home 2 days a week. So there's a way that we could actually probably create a micropod with our kids and teach our kids and alternate. How do we do that? What are the resources to help us do that? If we can't get our leaders, our legislators to even sit in the room to kind of help them understand, here's the possibilities behind these type of policies. Here's what they could really be. Here's how they could really benefit our community. To me, they're not doing their jobs. They're not listening to their community. They're not listening to their constituents. They're listening to an agenda that was given to them by somebody that also gave them a donation for their next campaign.
This is what I know for sure. You open up choice programs, and let's not make it about choice, because really what we're shooting for is opportunity.
Yep.
Constantly opportunity. So I think like we've misbranded the whole thing, because this thing about school choice is, I should have a choice, blah, blah, blah. This isn't a buffet. We're not trying to make a salad, right? We're trying to put as much opportunity before our kids that gives them a leg up or an advantage in a world that doesn't want them to have leg ups and advantages. So we are watching other kids have the opportunity to do whatever they want, become artists or engineers or, city council members or whatever they want to become or whatnot, because the opportunity is not because there's a school choice. It's because of opportunity. And we're trying to say, what should be the Black opportunities? We need double. Right? Because it's a twice as good problem. Like whatever white kids need, Black kids need double that, because we have because they had a 400-year head start.
Right.
So we need to actually mitigate against that. So what type of opportunities are we going to put before our kids? And when I think about the opportunities that our kids should have, we don't have to educate our families and students about that, because this is what I know and what I've watched for a long time is you open up a choice program and it fills up with names. You open up a new school and it gets a waiting list if it's a good one, or if it's one that people actually want. You open up any type of scholarship program, any type of resource and whatnot. And so we don't have a problem with having to educate our people about the need for these opportunities or whatnot, because when you actually put the resources behind one, guess what happens? They show up.
Yeah.
So they've already proven that it's the difference what people say and think and what they actually do. And what Black people actually do is when they see a resource, they come running towards it, like in hordes. Yeah. So we should have something. If we were smart, educated people with some resources and some money, at the very top, we should have something like a National Black Education Resource Center. That was the national clearinghouse for money and opportunities and different school types. Do you want to start a pod? Click this tab. Do you want a different type of school for your kid or try Montessori? Hit this tab. Are you having a bad time? Is your kid getting kicked out every 3 days because of an IEP? Click this tab, right?
Right.
We got all these major organizations with big ass budgets, lots of staff who are wearing great suits and eating great food all the time and having one conference after another. How many Black conferences are there going to be this year? How many? Good number of them. Tens of thousands, right? Would you say?
Say it's a good number of them, because they're starting to. Some of them are starting to send me sponsorship packets.
This is my point. And I get the same sponsorship opportunities. You can put your logo on our thing. I want your logo. I want your logo. I want y'all to go and have a meeting and sit together and figure out how you're going to pull together resources and information and an agenda, so that every Black parent in America doesn't have to look to white movements to be able to know what's up and what's going on. Black people don't need to be educated about opportunity. We know what opportunity is and isn't. We know where it doesn't exist. And we're living in circumstances where just city boundaries are putting us in places where it's obvious that we don't have the same resources, which is why when you light a torch in any one of those dark spaces of America and everybody comes to it, open up a school that looks halfway decent, and guess what? People come, right?
Right.
So maybe our new movement needs to be around, we have to maybe stop. Well, let me test this with you, because I'm going to say it and then then I need you to test it whether it works for you or not. We need to stop pushing white folks to start doing things for us and start pushing our own people who have something in life to start organizing their resources and their information into a way that's useful for our people that we can determine for ourselves.
No,
Like,
I agree with that 100%. I mean, if you look at the resources that we have in front of us with, our athletes, with, some of our business people, with our musicians, if we started to actually pull those resources together, we could probably, if we got 100 athletes in the room right now, and each one of them gave us $25,000 to $50,000, we could start a national clearinghouse. There's a couple. I mean, if we had the right contacts, or if they would pick up the phone when we call, there's probably one or two people that we call right now and say, hey, you can be on the front end of this. You can make a donation that will actually allow us to start a national clearinghouse and it run for 15, 20 years.
And I don't know why we haven't, in a world of Jay-Z's and a world of Oprah's and Robert Simmons and Melody Hobson's, in a world in which we are not really broke. Like Black people as a collective, if you look at us as a people, American Blacks as a people, if you pull us out just separately and look at us, and then look at all the rest of the world, right? We are one of the most chosen group of people, if you were to look at the economies of a lot of people elsewhere who are doing more than us. Thank you very much. There are countries that aren't even Black countries like Cuba that are actually doing more educationally for their people than we are doing. So it's not like we're really broke. We act broke. We tend to think broke. We have broke thinking. We don't have broke necessarily resources, because we're kind of like Africa. People are just pillaging our resources. They're buying one of us off here, buying another one of us off there, putting us in a position here or there. So maybe the real movement for us by us is a kind of a joke if we're not really making it about us. Like starting with, what are we doing?
But it's funny. Part of that mentality goes back to how we've been educated. We've always been told that you can't do this, or you can't pull your resources together, or, only a couple of you will make it out of this neighborhood. Only a couple of you will make it to the NFL, the NBA. And once you make it, you do what's good for you. We were never taught to really say, hey, here's how you can truly transform your community.
Mm-hmm.
By working together, pulling your resources together. I mean, when you look at especially a lot of the things that are happening now, one thing I laugh about, as more of our states are making marijuana legal, you're not going to see a federal push until big business has figured out a way that they're actually going to be able to manufacture, supply it, and own that piece. Because the minute from a federal level that it goes legal, you know how many millionaires in the Black community there will be?
I mean, that's a good point, though, Emory. Like, though, think about it. Like, we do a lot of complaining about, oh, y'all making weed legal in states, and only the white people are going to be able to profit from it, blah, blah. Really? We have an entire hip hop community that is worth trillions of dollars in collective sales and holdings. And you telling me that there's something wrong with you if you can't get in on that market? They're getting in now, but in the beginning, come on.
And what's happening is, and what a lot of people don't realize, so a lot of our mentoring groups that are out reaching these kids, what we're showing them is like, hey, that you actually have a mind to operate a business. Mm-hmm. You've been selling weed on the corner for 2-3 years, whereas you can take those same principles that you've been doing and apply that to a true business. So once that becomes legal, and now they already kind of have this insight of, all right, this is how a business operates and runs. Now I don't have to worry about cops coming to arrest me or kicking down my door and doing things that are considered illegal to sustain this business. Now I can actually market it. I'm already on Facebook. I'm already on Twitter. So I actually already understand how to do a actual marketing campaign, because I was just doing it for fun. Now, when you start to legitimize these things, this is the type of education that our kids should have been learning along the way in school. They learned on the streets.
So maybe I'm hearing a lot of things in that. Like one just obvious thing is we're worried about getting more kids into teaching when we might actually, the real game is getting more kids to think about opening schools, right?
Yeah.
Like to think about owning the enterprise rather than working within it. Maybe we need to stop teaching kids to be workers and to start being owners even within education.
Yeah. I mean,
And maybe in our movement, I'm going to ask you a tough question because I feel like, you never feel as old as you actually are, but I feel like, younger in my mind, but older in my body and spirit than I actually am. But in my generation of so-called ed reform or ed advocacy or whatever you want to call it, it's still very much a sharecroppers movement. It is not a ownership movement. We're not creating an educational ownership society. Maybe that's on you. Maybe I quit, or maybe I just like pull back and keep doing what I'm doing, and I wait for you to teach the young people to own.
I'll take it, because I mean that's one of the drivers of me doing this work is, how do I actually show people that, you can be owners. You can actually run and lead this system. Like, I'm not an educator. I have a lot of friends that are actual educators, can develop curriculum, can take a group of kids, get them centered around something. I know business, I know marketing. So I can sit down with my friend that's that educator and say, hey, let's build out a school. You handle the curriculum. I'll handle everything else. How do we start actually showing our kids that can happen? You may not want to be a teacher. You may not be, into developing curriculum, but you can support your friend that has that gift and help them build out a school. Because what's happening now, a lot of our school leaders, they're great educators, but they lack in that business and finance skill. Mm-hmm. And we know what happens when the school isn't running right, when things aren't going right financially, when a mishap happens. That's not their background. We're seeing that they're doing great, making great strides with kids from an education standpoint. But the first thing that happens, that first mistake from a financial standpoint, their charter gets pulled. And we're not giving them any help. We're putting a lot on their shoulders to try to do this alone versus actually showing them like, hey, when you graduate from college and you say, you know what, I want to launch a school. Well, if you look within your class, you probably have a friend that's a marketing major. You probably have a friend that's a business major. You have a friend that does finance. If the four of you come together, that makes it a lot easier for you to successfully open and run a school versus you trying to do it yourself.
Well, I was only half joking when I said maybe I should stop and leave the work to y'all.
No, I'm not letting you stop.
Because I can't.
I need
have
you in the back of my ear
right?
saying, hey, young guy, I need you to do this.
But this is what I think for sure. This is what has always worked in my mind. I've been doing nonprofit work for 22 years. And in that time, I've organized a lot of things. I believe in the power of organizing people to come together, to break bread, and to have a positive conspiracy around what we are actually going to do. So in nonprofit world, we have lots of problems that we're trying to fix. I've worked on workforce development projects. I've worked on education projects. I've worked on economic development projects in nonprofit world. And then things like, direct services to people with serious and persistent disabilities. And in each of those cases, wherever I was, the meeting was the first step to something changing. Getting clarity in meetings about what is the problem, who has the power to change it, and what is our strategy for attacking them so that they make the change that we need made. That is the revolution. That is the movement. And if it's for us, by us, and it's really meant to be for us, by us, that positive conspiracy can only happen with people you trust. Yeah. Right? Because we have a lot of Negropeans who will be in meetings and then want to run back and report all of what's going on and whatnot. And nothing kills a strategy faster than that. And it's not that I don't trust my allies across all races and across all groups that are in this fight with me for things so obviously that we need, like choice, like the ability to decide who, what, when, where, and how of education for our kids. It's not that I don't trust necessarily that aim brings us enough together. It is to say that I don't trust that that the strategy is going to be in our own image, and that we're going to have a lot of power over it if we don't decide first what it is that we're shooting for, what we want. So what are we going to do, Emory, for the meeting? That's what we need, the meeting.
I think the meeting is a lot closer than what we've dreamed of or what we imagined before. I think over the past couple of years, we've been able to pull more people to this cause, more people to understand that collective need to come together and say, hey, how are we going to figure this out? And, you know, I look at the work that you and the A Black Hands are doing. I look at the work that Naomi's doing. Even locally here in Indy, I look at the work that, you know, Ashley Burden is doing with her new group, Education Freestyle, EdFit Indiana. There are groups, you know, what the Powerful Parent Network is doing. There are groups that understand, like, hey, we truly need to start coming together and saying, how can we build this out to work for us? And then once we've decided and said, hey, here's the plan, now who's going to fund it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think once we have that plan, you know, we make that call. There are a lot of white philanthropy that still will support the work that we do. And there are some that understand that we say, we need to do this, give us the dollars, and you step in the background and let us do it. There's some that
give us the dollars unrestricted for operations, and not for special projects that will end. Right. Yeah. Don't let us
do this work.
Yeah.
Until we get the Oprahs and the Robert Smiths and the athletes to realize, hey, we need the dollars from you too. Like, I look at LeBron School. I love what he's doing. And one of the first things I said when it came out was, I like that he has a partnership with the public school district. But imagine if he did this 100% on his own. Because he has the power and network to do it. And I know the bigger picture. I know how they want to roll it out. And I know how it came to be. But also just others being able to see him stand there and say, hey, I'm going to go back in my community. I'm going to truly take ownership of this issue, and we're going to tackle it, and we're going to actually change the game.
Well, I actually, I'm going to be watching out for it. I am working on something that I can't reveal right now myself. But I do believe in a positive conspiracy, in coordinating the resources that you do have, in keeping with the Black tradition, which has always been a positive conspiracy of aligning what you have, what you can use to solve your problem, to free yourself. And we are in that situation again. We do have friends and allies. You know, I do want to say this about the abolitionist movement. It was full of problematic white people. The abolitionist movement was a good thing. It was meant to free us from something. It doesn't mean that all the allies in that movement saw things the same way, and they definitely didn't see freedom of Black people the same way, but they were useful. They were useful and they were helpful. And I think that's where we are in ed world. Now, if you have some abolitionists that start saying things like, well, you know, slavery ain't really all that bad.
You got a problem.
Now you got a problem in your movement. And I feel like in education world, we do have some counterintuitive people, some counterproductive people. And the only way that we will work through that is if we have the ability to have a show of strength. You can't talk to people from weakness. So let's do this. Let's create a movement for us, by pulling the people together. I really loved talking to you about this today, Emory, because you are already thinking this direction and you have some resource to do it because you have the vision to make it happen. You mentioned a few people. Naomi Shelton, who is leading the Charter Collaborative that is working with charter leaders of color, is a ownership building piece of this pie. We have to invest, support, and focus on people who are starting schools that they run. They run for us, by us. So she's in a pivotal, a critical position. You're in a critical position. Curtis Valentine, I think, is in a critical position. Sharif El Mekki, who's thinking about the human capital the pipeline of Black educators or whatnot. We could keep going down the list. Good, you mentioned Ashley Verdon. There's an Ashley Verdon too, who's amazing. But Chanel McLeod and others, I can name people in different parts of the country that are doing things. We don't have a lack problem. We're not lacking in anything except for connection and common cause.
Yeah. I mean, and once we start building those connections, that's going to make this movement for us, by us, stronger, and definitely ensure that it's going to last long. Because another name I forgot to drop, Nina Gilbert, and what she's doing down at Morehouse. And when they're able to launch this program, how transformational it's going to be, just for the simple fact of how they're looking at training future educators. The work that her and Sharif are doing is very needed. So being able to truly connect people together to where we're no longer working in silos, because there are a lot of great ideas that are happening by us that we don't know about other people that are doing that same work. So if we're able to connect and, truly start working together, that's actually one of the sad things about not having Bayo together, Bayo around anymore, because Bayo is a spot that all of us could come together.
That's right.
And network and be able to say, here's what I'm working on. Oh, I'm working on that same thing too. All right, let's work together. You have funding from this group. I have funding from that group. Let's put our dollars together now to see how we can make this even stronger or even bigger. We kind of lost that with Bayo going away, and I don't know what's going to be the new place that we all can get together, but hopefully, we'll figure that out soon.
It's coming. It's coming. There's hope coming. Black children of America, there's hope coming. Yeah. Black people are going to do this. We're going to work it out. Emory Edwards from EdChoice, thank you so much, brother, for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
No problem at all, man.
Everybody who's listening and watching, I appreciate you joining me for breakfast every day. It's great to see you in the comments. You add so much to the day. We have to think about this every day. Like, our kids deserve us to be this committed to their education, that we may not have all the answers, but at least we should be talking about it. We should be thinking about it every day, because until they're free and until their future is secured, our work is never done. Like, whatever else we're working on throughout the day is kind of small potatoes in comparison to the problem that we have with getting our kids in education. So I appreciate